Good afternoon. I am impressed with the turnout. Good job. My name is Tom Charity. I'm the year-round programmer here at the Viff Center. Welcome and thank you for joining us on the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This is week 2 of Devon's Creating Color Film Studies series. There are 5 in all. They're all Mondays at 1 o'clock. The talk will last approximately 40 minutes. There will be a short break of perhaps 5 minutes while Devon clears up his stuff and you go buy more popcorn. And then we will launch into today's film, which is Black Narcissus. As you're about to learn, Black Narcissus was directed by Powell and Pressburger, the team, and photographed by Jack Cardiff. And we happen to be showing a documentary about Michael Powell. It's called Made in England, and it screens this afternoon in the other screen right after Black Narcissus. I don't know what clever person scheduled that. So you're invited. You won't all fit in. That's it, I think, except as a general note, there's a local novelist, a very good crime novelist called Sam Weeby, who tweeted about coming here last week. He said he was here 3 times and he saw 3 very good films and had a very good time, except he said every single screening, somebody took it upon themselves to get out their phone and check whether they were checking the time or whether they were checking if they had a date. I don't know what they were checking, but they were disturbing the experience. Feel free to have your phones out for the talk. Devon won't mind, but I'll mind if you get them out during the film. Don't do that. Okay, over to you, Devon.
All right. Wow, there are an upsetting number of people here today. My God. Oh, welcome. I'm just gonna make sure there we go. It's all secure. I brought a lot of toys today. Am I audible? I'm a little far away from the mic. All good? Cool. Great. Hey, there we go. So welcome to part 2 of Creating Color. Those of you, a few of you were here last week, not all of you, but quite a few of you. I'm going to try and tie all these together a little, but not too much, so that if you're just here today, you won't feel like you missed anything. So last week, we talked about what we call applied color, right? If anyone remembers that, applied means that you have shot black and white film stock usually. It doesn't have to be black and white, but it usually was. And you apply a series of processes, tinting, hand painting, etc., to impose color upon that film stock. Today, we're going to be moving on, talking about mimetic color, which allows for things like using colored lighting in the way Jack Cardiff famously did with the Archers. So to really talk about that, though, we have to discuss the way in which film stock played a part in allowing this to happen. So mimetic color essentially tries to establish a visual equivalency between a depicted scene and what the audience sees, right? You see all those examples of applied color, whether that be that shot from Casanova or that shot from Stan Brackett's Black Ice. On the far left there, those do not reflect what was on set, right? All the shots on the right, however, do. We have the shot from the red shoes, a shot from Heaven Can Wait, and a third shot that I have horribly forgotten because I wrote this a few weeks ago. So doing this allows us to do fun things like record different colors of lighting onto film stock. The first set of color processes to gain any sort of traction, mimetic color, were created by the company Technicolor. To quote Natalie Kalmus, who was the color director of Technicolor, she was one of the most influential people to ever live in terms of color in cinema, and also one of the most loathed among cinematographers. And we're going to talk about her relationship with Jack Cardiff and others in a bit. She said, "From a technical standpoint, motion pictures have been steadily tending toward more complete realism. The advent of sound brought increased realism through the auditory sense. The last step, color, completed the process. Now motion pictures are able to duplicate faithfully all the auditory and visual sensations. Smell is left off here. We'll talk about smell-o-vision in class 3. This enhanced realism, actually Jack Cardiff directed one of the smell-o-vision films, fun fact. This enhanced realism enables us to portray life and nature as it really is. And in this respect, we have made definite strides forward. However, a motion picture will be merely an accurate record of certain events unless we guide this realism into the realms of art. What Natalie is getting at here is essentially saying, okay, we can now depict reality. Huzzah. We still need artists. The real, the VR that is color is not enough. We need it to be curated. And that's where, we get into people like cinematographers. Quick little overview of Technicolor. I'll make this very fast. Technicolor didn't really receive widespread purchase in Hollywood, actually really ever. It was never the default. However, it became increasingly popular as it was developed further and further. During the 1920s, you had Technicolor processes number 2 and 3. These were 2-strip processes. They could essentially depict 2 different hues on the color spectrum. However, because this is a one-dimensional kind of sliding scale of color, you cannot depict all the tones. If you'll notice in this nice little documentary scene here, there is no actual blue. You have skin tone and green, basically. You have 2 hues. You cannot create a full 2-dimensional color spectrum with 2-strip. Technicolor 4, also known as 3-strip Technicolor, was, I think it's uncontroversial to say, the breakthrough, where this was finally deemed, essentially good enough, quote unquote, realistic enough to depict real life scenes. To do this, you needed 3 film strips running through the camera at once, all 3 of which were monochrome. And you had a prism implanted inside the camera behind the lens that split the full color lighting spectrum onto these 3 strips, one for yellow, one for magenta, one for cyan. And in doing so, you could then use a dye transfer process to combine those 3 into one final full color release print, right? Something that you would show to audiences. There were lots and lots of issues with Technicolor. We tend to look through rose-colored glasses. Certain things like it was expensive. It had a real difficulty with highlights. It didn't have the greatest dynamic range. It had an effective ISO of, it's hard to measure because of the way the prisms work, but something around 25. So if you've ever wondered why your ISO 800 ARRI Alexa or whatever is not enough, try shooting 25. I show the Wizard of Oz here because it's a great example of the ideological aspect of, sorry, I'm just gonna get that to stop harassing everyone. There you go. Wizard of Oz is a great example of an ideological aspect to color filmmaking that took hold during the Technicolor era. You might have heard me kind of mislead everyone last week when I said the 20s were the most colorful decade prior to the 60s. And it's totally true, because throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s, color film, Technicolor, was the exception. You needed to have a reason to motivate Technicolor. The Wizard of Oz is a pretty textbook example of that. Technicolor, as we're about to see Dorothy enter Oz, spoilers, was used to evoke a dreamscape, right? She is leaving reality and entering what we might call hyper-reality, right? Even though Natalie Kalmus in that opening quote posited Technicolor as more realistic, Technicolor was more often than not used to depict unreality or altered states. Here are some examples from Richard Missett's book, Chromatic Cinema, of films that of films popular deployment of Technicolor. Something like, and these aren't all Technicolor, some of these are Eastman color that I threw in, but something like Andrei Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev uses color to depict art, but monochrome to to depict the life of the artist. Something like Otto Preminger's Bonjour Tristesse uses Technicolor, or actually Eastman again, to depict the past, and monochrome to depict the present. Obviously, you have something like Wizard of Oz, or I'm just gonna get the thing here. Let's see, what was the other example I threw in here? Oh yes, something like Irene, where similar to Wizard of Oz, dreams were depicted with Technicolor, the waking life depicted in black and white. This is where the Archers, also known as Powell and Pressburger, and Jack Cardiff come in, because they flip that on its head. You might notice that one of these is not like the other. And those are stills from Earth and Heaven in Powell and Pressburger's A Matter of Life and Death. They went out to explicitly invert this relationship with this movie. They wanted to depict heaven as a bureaucratic state, right? Drained of all color, of all life. The mortal life was unpredictable, vibrant, and most importantly, full of human romance and love. And with that little rundown of Technicolor out of the way, this is where we can once again talk about basically how lighting works. Lighting works via the mechanics of Newtonian color, optical color. Again, Audrey Hepburn, she is not red. She is not bright red. She is similar skin tone to almost all other humans in terms of, she is a dull orange like the rest of us. However, because she is being lit by light that has been filtered to appear red, by taking out all the other colors of the spectrum, she appears red, different than surface color. We can express that with one of my little lights here. I brought some toys. Let me turn that way up. There we go. So this here is a nice little bright LED light. For those of you who are really keeners, can anyone guess what color temperature this is?
3,200.
3,200. Give them in the $5,000. All right. So I'm going to turn that light red, right? And what colors have I taken away to create red there? Everything else primarily green and blue, right? And so this gel here is not a red gel. It is actually a subtractive gel that takes away the other colors. And this gel here is full of what is called surface color, right? It has an inherent color. And by shining light through it, we create Newtonian color. We create optical color. And so I'm actually removing color by doing this, creating the effect of adding one color. It's a neat trick. And so using these gels, let's do this one here, that was the primary way that throughout history, cinematographers have created the effect of color on film. And this has only recently changed, actually, with the advent of RGB LEDs, which have not become the standard, but they are much easier and have now become a very popular alternative. So Technicolor, let me just turn off this light here. There we go. Technicolor, according to historian Scott Higgins, went through 3 kind of phases in its use of both production design and lighting. During the very early first phase, which only, according to him, lasted about a year, you had films like Becky Sharp, in which very strident colored light sources were used. Notice how the actors here are lit with a beautiful, kind of unmotivated golden light from the right. There's blue moonlight and a neutral kind of ambient room light in the same shot. This was, however, not to last. And by the time you get to 1937, a film like A Star is Born, you have what is called the restrained style. This style called for a very muted palette. This was an active reaction to that first style, the demonstrational style. Notice how all these shots have 1 or 2 tones that maybe pop. The rest are all earth tones and gray scales. This was considered a more kind of disciplined, dignified method of dramatics. You're basically treating the film as if it was black and white with some splashes of color. This gave way to the assertive mode, which is exemplified in films like the MGM musicals of the Freed Unit and films like Michael Curtiz's Robin Hood, which is what you're seeing here. You have a, one might call it in between, but it's really kind of its own thing in terms of this mode. It is a mode that tries to take advantage of a full spectrum of colors at most times for storytelling. But we're still not at that point when we are, waving our hands going, look at what we can do. At this point, audiences knew what Technicolor could do. But the use of color was used in a very strident way for storytelling, especially in production design. Notice how all the light here is white. A great example of the dominance of white light in Hollywood is the only Technicolor film by my favorite director, Ernst Lubitsch, which is called Heaven Can Wait. And we play here. There is not a single off-balance light source in this entire film. The entire film is lit. It's a very colorful film, tons of production design, just with hues everywhere, lots of primary colors. But this is all created with surface color. We'll get into that next week in more in depth. But this dominance of white lighting was actually an imposition by the Technicolor company upon Hollywood more than anything. Throughout the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, studios or Technicolor required as a part of their contract for using their equipment and their technology, which they had patented, they required you to have a Technicolor consultant on set. You had to use their labs, which meant that every day you'd get notes from the Technicolor technician. And those Technicolor technician notes were more often than not, can you please make the lighting less colorful? The idea was to move away from Technicolor as this cinema of attractions show, look what we can do fireworks thing, and towards a more disciplined, hey, you can use this for everything. We're not going to rock the boat. This is not some gimmicky thing like tinting, God forbid tinting. This is just a replacement for black and white as the standard storytelling mode, which of course never came to pass. A few historical forces saw to that, and we'll get to those in a bit. From the Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers, it's a lot of letters there, from a 1957 publication. Normally, as we have seen, the color quality of a light source should be that for which the film is balanced. Basically, use white light. If several light sources are being used to illuminate the subject, as is almost always the case, they should be as alike in color as possible. However, it also argued that color lighting could be used briefly, for example, as a very brief counterpoint to the dominant white light. We can see an example of this in a famously colorful and yet not scene from obscure independent film Singing in the Rain. So in Singing in the Rain, you have this lovely scene where Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds enter a Hollywood studio. And throughout the scene, we see tons of lights with colored gels on them. Gene Kelly begins turning them all on. And throughout the scene, you're going to see in the background tons and tons of color. And yet, there's a little trick here that that Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen and the team be sure to abide by. With one or two exceptions, which we saw there with the red, Kelly and Debbie Reynolds are not actually being lit by these colored fixtures. They're being lit by balanced tungsten fixtures. These lights are production design. They are part of the film, but they're not the lights actually lighting the actors. We can see the close-up on Debbie Reynolds. She is not as purple as that light would have us believe. So this was a common kind of toolkit of cinematographers at the time. They did not want human skin to ever appear off color. You could not have Debbie Reynolds appear red. This was totally counter to the beauty standards of what Technicolor technicians and consultants expected of their product. They had a brand to manage, which is a little frightening. There are exceptions, and these exceptions tend to stick in the kind of mainstream consciousness in a way that kind of biases our reading of the time. One such example is Gone with the Wind, in which David O. Selznick actually fired the initial cinematographer, Lee Garms, for disagreements over how far to push the color. And throughout the film, David O. Selznick kind of essentially would swap out everyone from the directors to the cinematographers in an attempt to exert more control over the look of the film. He wanted to push Technicolor far, and he had, of course, many disagreements with the technicians. His way of getting around that was basically just cycling through staff until he got his way. And that's how you get scenes like this from Gone with the Wind that have incredibly strident use of color in a way that was pretty much the exception. If you watch any other Technicolor film from 1939, there is no scene quite so vibrant in its color as the sunset scenes from Gone with the Wind, which are almost monochromatic in their extremity of lighting. So, you know, the long and short of all this is that we often see artistic direction as a product of technical limitations, right? I often hear, oh, we edit faster now because we couldn't back then. We light with more color now because we have LEDs, we couldn't back then. That tends to be only partially true. The central things limiting Technicolor cinematographers from using more color was ideological. It was this adherence to a sort of monochromatic centrism in cinema. This idea that, hey, the standard that we need motivation to deviate from is black and white film stock, white light. There's actually a similar adherence to monocentrism in the audio world, which audio engineers will tell you all about. It's a lot of fun. But that's where we can start to talk about the Archers and what's going on with them, because they were weird. I'm going to start with a film that is, I think, in many ways overlooked for its cinematography because the really famous cinematographer did not shoot it. This is The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which happens to be my favorite of the Archer's work. And it was shot by George Pernow. And throughout the film, it is an immensely colorful film, as we see here. But most of the color is brought about through production design. The Archers were incredibly fabulistic filmmakers. They very rarely shot on location, and when they did, they made it look otherworldly. But you more had stuff like this, where you had dioramas, matte paintings, various things like that. And throughout Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, you have mostly neutral lighting with maybe some warm, cool splashes. This is one of the more colorful scenes. But you have one exception that I can't help but think was kind of their template for the rest of their films. And this is a scene from near the end of the film. And you have a scene where two characters are stopping at a stoplight. And I'm just going to let it play for a second and maybe get some audio here.
Sorry, sir. Couldn't make it.
You like being the general's driver?
Of course, who wouldn't? He's such an old darling. I could have done a handstand when he asked for me. Do you know, he chose me out of 700 girls, sir. Some odds, isn't it? 700 to 1. Crying out loud, look at that light. He ought to be reported. Oh, come on, that'll be all night.
So if anyone noticed her dialogue there, a very key line, that there's a light, right? And she actually says that light is too bright. So that very, very strident use of colored lighting was not only motivated, it was mentioned in the dialogue. But still, that use of colored lighting was absurd. That was completely off the wall by the standards of 1945. And the reason the Archers could get away with it, and Jack Cardiff would push the envelope hugely, was their location in London. Technicolor had a much smaller footprint in the UK. And whenever any of the consultants had notes, they had to communicate with the offices in Los Angeles, which was rather slow. So this essentially gave the Archers, Cardiff, and Pernow a ton of leash in which to experiment. And there's kind of a myth that Jack Cardiff was hired because he he was more, creative or whatever. He was hired because Georges Perrenot was, according to Michael Powell, too slow. So they hired the guy who was faster, and then they got A Matter of Life and Death, which is a pretty good deal. And so immediately at the opening scene of A Matter of Life and Death, which is Jack Cardiff's big debut with Powell and Pressburger. Oh yeah, there's this thing here.
27, you get that? That's very important. Education.
It opens with a plane crash.
Religion, Church of England.
More specifically, it opens with a phone call between a telegraph operator and a pilot who's in the midst of crashing. And we can immediately see something's different here. We have bright red warning lights that are only barely motivated, contrasted against blue backgrounds and a key light that, yes, maintains skin tone, but that's not what stands out compositionally about the shot. It's the use of other colors throughout. And immediately, I'm not going to risk pressing the left or right button because I actually know what that does. Immediately, we cut to David Niven crashing in a plane. And his plane is on fire, but virtually any other cinematographer, any other director, you'd have fire in the background, neutral white stage lights on David Niven. That isn't the case here. He is given a bright red backlight that doesn't quite resemble the fire, but it sure is expressive. And throughout A Matter of Life and Death, you have this play with lighting and colors, and especially layering and symbolism. In this film, red is many things. It's fire, it's danger, it's death, but it's also love. And in this scene, all those things are mixed into that one hue. Later on in the film, we get mystically motivated light. So this is a scene where the reality that David Niven is in gets intruded upon by someone from heaven.
Eh bien, mon cher. Comment ça va? Not too good. Not too good. Ah. I would not bother to ring that bell if I were you. Nothing will happen. A little trick of mine, you remember? After all, what is...
At the beginning of the scene, the lighting is motivated by sunset, a warm light from the side, and suddenly we have a thunderstorm that is clearly not real. It is mystical, and that change to a mystical world is very obviously telegraphed by the change to that blue light, and then we're back in reality. So Cardiff here is, I feel like all the Technicolor folks must have had some sort of mass, panic when they saw this. It probably didn't go down very well. But it's these experimentations that Jack Cardiff was in the exact right time and place to do. And Michael Powell was certainly a willing collaborator.
Well, speaking officially.
Their next film together was the one you're going to see, Black Narcissus. And I'm going to kind of refrain from really going deep into Black Narcissus because I'd like those of you who are here to see for the first time to actually experience it. But I do want to talk about the film's influences because they're fascinating. Jack Cardiff was one of the great popularizers of the term painting with light because his primary influences were artists, not other filmmakers or photographers. This painting from Vermeer is explicitly referenced in one of the opening scenes of the film, for example, and this establishes a pattern of neutral white lighting that then slowly gives way to what Jack Cardiff calls an angry palette. Jack Cardiff didn't specifically call out Rembrandt, but I can't help but see a lot of Rembrandt, as you see on the left, in the later scenes of this film. Cardiff, however, did specifically call out Vincent van Gogh, especially this specific painting in a nighttime cafe. He said he was struck when he first saw it, that this painting, the green and the red and the yellow, struck him as angry contrasts. It's an ugly, ugly set of colors when printed together with the specific hues he used. And that was the main reference for the back half of the film. Although I can't help but see a lot of one of Cardiff's other favorite painters, Turner, in there. Sort of pre-impressionist use of very, very expressive colors that in a way that don't quite match reality, but evoke sort of a notion of reality, which is really necessary when you're doing something like the Archers did in Black Narcissus, which is that the film was, set in India, but entirely shot at the Pinewood Studios in London. And the film has possibly the most extensive use of matte paintings in cinema history. They look shockingly real, but they don't need to look real for it to work. They look evocative. They're expressive. They work in tandem with the painterly aspirations of Cardiff's lighting to create this kind of this fantasy world rather than a real concrete depiction of its location. You can see once again in this quite frightening scene how again, I can't imagine the Technicolor technicians liking what the lighting is doing to Deborah Carr's skin tone here. They're using green gels on a human, which was not cool. And that's why we're watching it. So a couple other, an interesting kind of twist of history is that at about the time that it became even more technically possible, because of the fall of Technicolor, to light with many colors, it fell out of fashion. The new Hollywood cinematographers, if you watch many Hollywood films in the 70s, everyone from Vilmos Zsigmond to Owen Roizman to Gordon Willis, they started lighting in earth tones. That was in. And so films like Dario Argento's Suspiria became the exception. And this has maybe the most strident use of colored lighting of that whole decade. And throughout, we have use of surface color, optical color in tandem to create these these nightmare hellscapes. Whole scenes lit through red curtains to bathe everyone in red. This film was finished using the Technicolor dye transfer process, but was shot with a chromogenic film stock, basically what we use today. A form, usually we use the blanket term Eastman color, but that's like calling it Kleenex. It's just single strip color. We're going to talk about that a lot more next week. The question of motivation is an interesting one too. And I love how actually different cinematographers have utilized that over the years. And we can see a bit of that here again with a shot from Suspiria that I've desaturated. And I like to play a little game. I'll desaturate a shot from Suspiria, and we have to guess what colors the light sources are going to be. In any other film, I'd say that lamp is orange, tungsten, and we might get a blue moonlight, but this is Suspiria. So we have a big red spotlight and the deepest marine, it looks like they're underneath an aquarium lighting. But if you notice, the way the colors are composed, this image only works compositionally with color, and that's the layering that Argento and Luciano Tovoli are doing. So you have the actress on the right there. In the original, there's no real layering, right? That light, dark light, it's there, but she doesn't really pop out from the background. The red throws her into relief behind her because she's lit in blue. Color is a necessary part of this film's use of depth. Again, kind of moving forward throughout the years, one of the most famous kind of cinematographer-director combos was Wong Kar-wai and Chris Doyle, although Chris Doyle did not shoot these scenes. This was Andy Lau. Chris Doyle only shot the second half of this film, Chungking Express. But either way, this film, Wong Kar-wai was, justifiably acclaimed for his use of color in this, but he was insistent in interview after interview that he was not exceptional. He said, no, this is just the way Hong Kong looks. Watch any much more obscure Hong Kong film from the 80s or the early 90s, and you'll see similar lighting. The reason why this film was so acclaimed to a certain degree in the Western world was that it was just happened to be one of the films that broke through as an art house sensation. And so in this case, this strident use of colored lighting is simply Wong Kar-wai, in his own words, depicting what's around him. The poorly balanced fluorescent tubes of Kowloon Walled City and the neon signs that were everywhere in Hong Kong in the early 90s. To me, this speaks to the way that the use of color in our day-to-day lives really impacts what our filmmakers are doing. I'm going to use one more example here to talk about, let me get up to the present day now. If my slides load, 1 second. Come on, load, there we go. I want to talk about LEDs and the way that LEDs, not only as filmmaking lights, which is what we have here, but the LEDs that we encounter in day-to-day life have changed how our movies look. I don't know about everyone here, but I don't go clubbing, but I have had the luck of shooting in a few clubs. And I've also walked down various popular streets at night. And to me, what has changed the most since about 20 years ago is that cities have become more colorful because cheap and efficient LEDs that can essentially mimic various colors have become omnipresent. And this greatly impacts our cinema, not only because we are depicting that, but because the means of production have changed. 20 years ago, if I wanted to do something like, just gonna try this here. If I wanted to do something really, really wacky, like this, oh my gosh, that's not the preset I wanted. There we go. If I wanted to do something really wacky like this and just do a really gratuitous set of colored lights that cycle through every hue in the spectrum throughout this room here, I would probably, to do just that now, have a crew of about 4 people at the very least, and spent a few $1,000s on very, very specialized tools. But this is just what I have in my bedroom right now that I take out to when I get hired to like film a documentary or something. And the fact that we don't need those gels anymore to kind of easily create very, very ambitious kind of colored lighting setups, we call them, but palettes, has meant that especially independent cinema has become almost performatively colorful. The cinematographers amongst us often talk about like the cliche of someone holding a bright red flare, or all those Astera tubes you see in the back of movies. It will look and watch any independent film, you'll see at least a dozen LED tubes in the background as set dressing. It's a thing. But I don't want to make it seem like technology is the only thing that encourages this. Technology and trends and artistic movements all interplay in really, really interesting ways. And Black Narcissus is such an incredible example of that. I think that, to me, the best cinema is not cinema that's timeless. It's cinema that could only have been made by certain people in a certain place and time. And Black Narcissus is one of the great examples of that, in ways that are terrific, troubling, and most importantly, fascinating. I hope it really sticks with everyone here. And yeah, that's my rant on color. I decided to, finish about 5 minutes earlier than I wanted to, because I wanted to take some questions before going, or give the opportunity if anyone has them. So, does anyone have any questions about colored lighting, Technicolor, anything before we start the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these rogue directors were experimenting in the beginning of Technicolor. How they monitor what they were.
Oh, they didn't have monitors. So back then, you had basically the optical viewfinder. You could the cinematographer or camera operator, because the cinematographer never operated the camera; it was union rules used. And essentially, the director had to trust the cinematographer. And you had to do tons of camera tests before these films. You would do tests. You would set up examples of your scenes, makeup tests, lighting tests, and then run them as a set of dailies before you make the film. And hopefully the tests work out. If they don't, you do more tests or you run out of money. But a lot of this was just the fact that someone like Jack Cardiff had been working with Technicolor for years. He was the only British cinematographer at the time who was approved by Technicolor at the time of the making of this film. And he had shot many documentaries. He had done second unit work on Colonel Blimp. So he knew how the film stock reacted. And I think that's actually an underrated skill these days. We can see things on a monitor, but the really, really experienced cinematographers can just look at a scene and go, yeah, I know how this is going to look. So it's a real skill. I saw a question there.
I guess just in current filmmaking, how much would you say that graphic design to actually lighting design for
Preferably a lot. I could say on the last film we did, there were, we had numerous conversations with the various production and costume designers to go, okay, we're shooting in a forest, so something like a bright red jacket isn't gonna photograph great because it's reflective, the Pacific Northwest Gore-Tex look. It's reflective and it will, cause the sensor to actually overload and I can't use that data. So I would veto that. Things like the color of the car used, that sort of thing. Because I'd know, okay, we're shooting some stuff at night with fake firelight, and that will cause things to render differently. Like underneath this white light, you can see like my shirt is like a little green. But if I were to, for example, do some fake firelight here, I'm going to try and do all the fixtures here in 1 second. Let's do warmer. There we go. Fake firelight here. My clothes now appear a different color to your eyes, and to a camera, they're going to appear really different. And so there's a lot of give and take where we'll shoot tests the day before the scene where we need to know if the actress's trousers are going to photograph well, that sort of thing. But unfortunately, at least on independent productions and even some studio stuff, you're laying the track like grommet 1 feet ahead of you, and you don't have the chance to do that, which is the real shame. But yes, preferably weeks of prep. I think I could take 1 or 2 more. Yeah, I saw one person there, yeah. Sorry, I should be rephrasing the thing, yeah.
You just talked about performative, the modern movies are performatively colorful. Could you please talk about how now you're seeing a lack of motivated lighting and more importantly, natural lighting? Like if you ask somebody what the most beautiful films they've ever seen, they've probably used both of those.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're at a time when there's kind of multiple things colliding. I think we're at a time where, like, are there any like aspiring cinematographers here or working cinematographers? I'm aspiring. Yeah, it's a few. I'm sure that every single one of you probably loves Gordon Willis, or if you don't, you love Roger Deakins. And they are two of the history's greatest proponents of the motivated lighting aesthetic, right? There's this great Wall-E special feature where he teaches the Pixar people how to light, and he cannot do a 3.7 to save his life, which is fun. But I'd say that modern cinematographers, younger cinematographers, are using motivated lighting, but they're kind of at cross purposes sometimes, where you have something like I Saw the TV Glow, where the motivated lights are twisted into all these fun colors because the film is establishing, establishing an other than real aesthetic. But I see constantly films where, I see very questionable production design choices because the cinematographer really wanted a certain color. So it's like, can we please put a lamp there with a purple lampshade? That sort of thing. And, it can get what we call, the scientific term is it gets sweaty. But I think that where cinematographers take exception to this is often in the sense that a lot of these sources are just cliches at this point. Like we've just seen the same thing over and over because those are the tools that are available. Like, I mean, if anyone here watches YouTube, you've probably seen endless number of that light hooked up to a light dome and, with a 3/4 angle because it looks cinematic and big air quotes and that sort of thing. I think the problem is not use of tools. It's following of trends without knowing why those trends exist and what your context in history is. Which that's a big ask, but I feel like it's a good thing to aspire towards. So I think exactly one more from back there. These are great questions, by the way. I'm really enjoying this.
Hi, I was pretty shocked when you talked about the regulations back in the old days when they have like Technicolor consultants to impose rules on the filmmakers. So I was wondering if you say there are similar norms now that you think will be gradually rejected or considered ridiculous on filmmaking, like this kind of imposed regulations or rules.
I think I'm going to paraphrase Kristen Thompson at the end of Film Art here and say that we're very bad. Anyone at any given point is bad at seeing their own limitations, right? We are not that aware of our own limitations right now, right? We see what we can do and what they couldn't do before. But in 20 years, we're going to look back and go, wow, we really missed the trick here. And to me, but as far as your specific question goes, I think it really depends if you're working in if you're like me and you're just like a like a young punk working in independent film, you're freer than ever. I feel like I can do whatever I want. I can make a video essay where I light myself like Napoleon or whatever. Like no one's gonna stop me. You try. But if you're, for example, if you're like Ben Davis working on your 5th Marvel film, and Kevin Feige in the VFX department is saying you better light this entire action scene with softboxes from above with white light because we got to match the thing we shot a decade ago when Robert Redford was still around. That is very limiting, and I think that the way that blockbusters are made these days is truly constricting in a way that I think is comparable to Natalie Kalmus's Reign of Terror in the 40s. So yeah, I think it really depends on the production context, but I can say I feel really free. I don't know. I did this nonsense. That's fun. Okay. Yeah, we're good.
Devin, thank you so much. I'm sure I'll speak for everyone. You want to say, learn a lot today.
Thanks, everyone.
So we